But talk to me, when you think of front to back, how would you explain that to the punter at home?
At the moment, we'll talk around a standard house block, so 15.25 metres wide and about 650 square metres, right? So that's just our canvas at the moment. So in that situation there, you're likely going to have a shared driveway. In some instances, you might get two crossovers in, front dwelling to have a garage and a parking spot on the front, then a driveway down the side. In a nutshell, yes, you've got two dwellings, one at the front of the property, one at the back, and without a side street, you've got quite commonly a shared driveway.
Which some people sort of lean into, I think. The people I speak to go, oh, well, that might be the superior. That's their thoughts, is that, hey, we're still standalone and we're not a duplex.
If you're on a standard size block, 650, it's going to be a bit of a squeeze. If you're looking at a site that's maybe 750, 800 square meters, and if you can get your own driveway and have a separate one at the front, you're almost into house territory.
Hey team, welcome back to the Development Tank. Pumped today, Guru's back, and we're talking about an age-old topic. Do you go front to back or side by side? So the multi-unit development front to back versus the dual occupancy or the duplex, however you like to call it, dual occupancy here. But yeah, are we side by side or are we sort of front to back? So we'll get into it with Gav. Please get across to the Instagram page, Peter Kelly Official. Come say hello. Plenty of stuff happening there on the daily. We're enjoying that, and make sure you jump in the Little Fish Network, get in there, budding developers, budding property people with big aspirations that are learning from each other every day. So get in there, littlefishnetwork.com.au. Bonnie will drop it in the comments below. Let's get into it. Gav, thanks for popping by.
Good to be back again. Yes, you're right. It is a bit of an old age situation or question, but there are some new planning guidelines in play that sort of previously some councils forced you, if not encouraged you to go front to back versus a side by side, and now it's the playing field has opened up.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly right. Playing field has opened up. And also, I'll just say we have got our Superstar Town Planner in here within the next couple of episodes, I'd say. I'm just looking down there at Superstar Bonnie to see when he'll be releasing it. But he's coming in the next week or so to dive deep on those changes and where the opportunities lie. So make sure you hit subscribe, turn the bell notifications on so you don't get left behind.
Look, it's definitely no secret where we like the side-by-side design. It's been the core of our business for a long time, and we do like it, and there's a lot of good reasons why, and we'll touch on that. But just to use, I guess, to pull something out of a hat as an example, Monash City Council, they preferred front-to-back designs. I think in their neighbourhood character overlay, I think they prefer to see a single dwelling from the street rather than two dwellings from the street, which has been their argument for years and years and years. And there are some side-by-side designs in the areas, but predominantly it's the front to back. But with the new res code coming in, I don't think they're going to be able to enforce that much anymore. Yeah,
well, they're the things that we'll deep dive with Dan. But yeah, spot on, Gav. So this argument might become even more relevant, the fact that you have got both options. So Gav, talk to me. Let's go front to back first. Let's talk about front to back. Let's talk the pros and cons. Then we'll move into the side-by-side. But talk to me, when you think of front to back, how would you explain that to the punter at home? And then let's talk pros and cons.
Yeah, essentially, I guess at the moment, we'll talk around a standard house block. So 15.25 metres wide and about 650 square metres, right? So that's just our canvas at the moment. So in that situation there, you're likely going to have a shared driveway. In some instances, you might get two crossovers in, front dwelling to have a garage and a parking spot on the front, then a driveway down the side. But if the old technique of doing this would be to keep an existing house and then build one on the back, which is, I guess, very, very similar format, but you didn't quite always have that flexibility. You would have to have two garages at the back and have a shared driveway, which is common property, and all the implications that come with that. So in a nutshell, yes, you've got two dwellings, one at the front of the property, one at the back, and without a side street, you've got quite commonly a shared driveway.
Yeah, correct, spot on. And that's sort of the big thing, isn't it? Because that's going to be common property on the complex's title.
Yeah.
And that that land isn't going to live on each other's title. So if you've got a 650 square metre block and you've got to forgo, call it 100 square metres of common drive, or then the rest of the land is divvied up amongst the owners, and sort of land adds a lot of value to an asset. So one of the big things for me is when I think of, I guess, front to back, is obviously you're a standalone dwelling. So that sort of circumnavigates the whole shared wall. And if someone's got reservations about a dual occupancy and having a shared wall, well, then you get that standalone design, which some people sort of lean into. I think the people I speak to go, oh, well, that might be the superior. But then you're going back to the common property. Someone may be driving past another person's property, and then the less land on site. But that's probably, when I think of it, people sort of, I guess that's their thoughts, is that, hey, we're still standalone and we're not a duplex.
I think it has a probably more of a negative impact on a resale than not. If you're on a standard size block, 650, it's going to be a bit of a squeeze. Yes, you're going to have dwellings that are separated, but they're probably separated by carports or garage, if you like. If you're looking at a site that's maybe 750, 800 square meters in more of a blue chip area. If you've got then 400 square meters for each dwelling, you're probably going to literally have a freestanding, more or less a house. You'd be able to fit maybe a 30 plus square house on it with its own garage separated. And if you can get your own driveway and have a separate one at the front, you're almost into house territory.
Yeah, correct. And you're able to, vehicle access is private, I think, which is important for these. And if you got the frontage to be able to create the big one at the front and still a decent one at the back, going into sort of these new tweaks with the planning regs, sometimes, and definitely in certain areas, council would lean on the character of the area to suggest that you need to do single story at the rear to keep with that. Keep with the character of that neighbourhood. Now that is gone, and will be interpreted a lot differently, doing the double story, double out the back and the front is going to definitely open up, because that was definitely something that sort of slowed down these front to back developments. Whether you're doing 2, 3, 4, 5, often the last one was a single story, which when you're doing your numbers and you're putting your resales in the Feaso, the baby one at the back was always discounted off those other units, which always sort of affected your Feaso. So now that won't go on. They won't be able to pull on the character aspects for that. So having all doubles and having confidence to do that, I think's definitely an important thing. But yeah, like you said, having 2 big homes, standalone, depending on the width and the depth of the block, I think it's probably maybe not a bad thing, because if you've got a massive frontage, a massive deep block, doing a dual occupancy still might work depending on the way you want to do it, but you're going to end up with massive backyards, and just the, sort of the symmetry of the block may not be optimized as much.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely buyers out there who would appreciate that. If you can't afford ballparking, if you can't afford $3 million for a house, with a 600 square meter block, then maybe you're happy to take, some people like being away from the street, so you might take the back house, get 400 square meters, and you're paying $1 million less. You got the same accommodation, but you might just have a slightly smaller backyard. But at the same time, 400 square meters is no small backyard. That's a good option. But there's also then, if you can take into consideration the corner sites, because that's a very similar design. But then you just got 2 street frontages, and I personally can find it a little bit off-putting, particularly if it's a busier street. If you've got a living area or a bedroom and you're building maybe 2 meters off the boundary or a meter off the boundary, and you've got people walking past on the footpath, they're literally 3 meters away from your bedroom window. Not super appealing to me, but we're looking at a site at the moment for a client. In that particular case, it's got a laneway down the side, and it's actually quite a good laneway. It's clean, it's wide, it's it's practical, if you like. Some of them aren't always. And in that instance there, the design that they're proposing will be to have a double garage off that laneway at the back. So there's actually no shared property. There's no driveway on the property. The front dwelling's actually got its own driveway. There's a second crossover there, so we can get the second car in there. So you're maximising the use of the land, no shared property, and the house at the back is 34 squares and is on 400 square meters. So it's actually it's a really good proposition.
So it nearly is a corner site. You have got that public access down the side, which no one, that's not going to be common property. It's a public driveway. So achieving that on a corner site, and that's the thing. I think that's negating some of the negatives that come with a front to back design. Even a corner, we can put that example you mentioned and the corner sites in the in the same bucket, because you're all getting your frontage, like you said. The corner one, depending on how you're increasing the privacy on that corner type thing. But to essentially have no common property, all your own frontage, suddenly you open up to double garages where a side-by-side double garages aren't always an option based on your width and your frontage. So a corner for me is always sort of, and if you can sneak to 3 or 4 on a corner, no common property, like we're getting pretty cool. I think we're getting pretty sexy. But even to do 2, I think you maybe, one of our favorite sites, which will go to market in a couple of weeks, Summit, genuinely standalone homes, 28, 29 squares, double garage. And I think something else we want to probably touch on is when you design more of that sort of, I guess, squarer type townhouse design, you've got less massive long hallways and, big stair voids, and you've got a lot of sort of moving space around the house because they're quite long, where you build more boxy designs. I definitely think you can get a lot more in. Like when I walk into Summit at 28 squares, there's stuff going on everywhere.
Feels like it's 30 plus, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I'm thinking about one now in Murrumbina, on Murrumbina Road. Like there actually are 32 squares, and they're that boxy standalone design, and they're massive. They are genuine houses.
Yeah, the houses aren't they? That's the market. That's what you think about, not just how it looks on paper, but it's who your buyers are and what they're looking at. So if they're genuine, they're a family looking for a house, then they're going to be looking at that and thinking, we could probably shave 500 grand or 500 off of a new house block here and actually get more accommodation, if not, and still have a good backyard.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the thing is, that's when you're looking at, before you buy a site, you're looking at what can I do with it, then looking at what sort of product you can get on it, and then what your end buyer is going to be looking at. And like you said, if it's a family looking for a house and they're looking in that suburb, good chance their budget looking at a house in that suburb is going to be more than what a townhouse sort of resale would be. So for me, you get to sort of slide in probably below the houses on your 600, but if you're on your 400 brand new standalone, well, for me, that's still going to entice a family buyer that's looking for a house, because you haven't got your common property. You're probably not detached. Even if you are detached, might be just by a garage. You've got the land component, front yard, backyard, and you've got just plenty of accommodation. If we're talking 30 squares of boxy type design, that's a proper house for mine.
Yeah, we've seen that. We've even the one we're doing in Summit Ave in Hampton. It was a 24 meter wide frontage, 22, 24.
Yeah.
And a bit shorter block.
Yeah.
Not a massive block, but because of the width, we were able to shorten the homes, and as you say, they became a little squarer, if you like, and less hallways, and we ended up getting some really good 31 square homes on that, and they're spacious.
Man, they're big. Like for me, it's nearly 2 squares. It nearly plays 2 squares bigger, a square or a boxier type design versus a longer.
And a bit more flexible with the design as well, with your approach, I think.
You're
not restricted by, a certain width upstairs.
Correct. Yeah. No, spot on. So I guess wrapping up on the sort of more front to back design, we've got the common property, that's a negative. You might have shared access, that's a negative. You've got a negative, which we sort of didn't touch on exactly, but build costs can be a little bit more expensive, and usually are, because you're building 2 homes. You're cladding 2 homes. You got 2 standalone homes versus a side-by-side big home with a shared wall down the middle. So a few more efficiencies with the side-by-side and not the front to back. But then the layout is definitely an advantage with those boxier type designs.
And there's got to be clients out there and customers who are, buyers that's what they want. There are people out there who want to be back, having a house behind another one off the street, nice and quiet with 350, 400 square meters. That's the top of their list.
Yeah, spot on. And that's the thing, you're exactly right, Gav. Like there's a house for everyone, and there's some people that aren't going to come with you as far as I want this or I want that. They want that. So everyone usually wants what they want. We're just, I guess, generalizing from a developer's perspective where we see, I guess where we see.
There's always trade-offs too. Like I was saying before, you maybe your living quarters in the house might be closer to the footpath, but in Summit's case, directly over that street is a massive park.
There's a massive park.
Both houses have got great views of a park. They're more or less freestanding, and they're huge. They're 28 squares or something, and they feel like 30 plus.
They feel massive, and I think, but there's always sometimes little ways to fix the little sort of, I guess, negatives like you mentioned, being close to the street, can we beef up the landscaping and things like that, just to create that sort of privacy that potentially isn't there at the start, at the start of your living there because trees and bushes haven't matured. Can we look to sort of build that up, bolster that up, so we can still get an aspect of the park, but we are, we've got that sense of privacy.
Well, I remember us all sitting around the table when the first drafts of the plans came in, and we were actually designing around that. We were sort of, look, how do we make the most out of the view and the park, but yet keep the downstairs, private from the street. So we definitely took that into account. And even with Summit, there's a huge tree right out the front. And we did everything we could to keep that tree because that also provides a degree of separation as well. Yeah. And a great outlook.
Yeah, no, 100%. So that's sort of your front to back. Obviously, when people are following along, they understand that we do a fair few side-by-sides. The advantages of the side-by-sides, Gav?
Look, I guess for us, it's just been no common property is the main one. And you do have a party wall, which, some people feel there are some negatives, and we can touch on that. But what that also does is it keeps costs down. And you're also building 9 times out of 10. It's just a reflection on the property next door, depending on what your strategy is and what you're trying to do. So that can also keep costs down as well. And, there's a demand. I think there's definitely a lot of people out there who really would like or would prefer a townhouse with, definite street frontage over a front to back design.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, definitely the shared wall scenario. I was chatting to someone on the phone the other day just to, they were saying, hey, is it, what do you think? And is it sufficient and all that sort of thing? I think, and some people sort of forget that it's not just the wall. It's often, there'll often be maybe an ensuite backing onto it. So suddenly you've got joinery and tiles and these extra layers that sort of thicken out that separation between dwelling to dwelling. Often, or sometimes the kitchen can be front to back, depending on what type of design it is. The staircase, so it's not just you're just a wall next to your neighbour. Often the living and then the time you spend isn't up against the wall either. So yeah, we've sold and developed a lot of them over the journey, and I reckon I've had one where one of the kids were using a subwoofer for their PS5 or something, and the subwoofer was sort of making its way. When it was cranked, was making its way to next door and was causing, a little bit of anxiety there. But
yeah, I've been in a couple of different townhouses over the last few years, and like the one I'm in at the moment, it's probably 10-year-old build, but it's solid, it's built well. And in the 2 years I've been there, the only time I've ever heard my neighbours was when his daughter had an 18th birthday and they had a big sound system in the living room, and I was pre-warned about that, and it's all fine, and we could just hear a bit of a hum, that was it. And apart from that, in the 2 years I've been there, never ever heard a sound. And in the previous house, I think the only thing you could ever hear was if someone was literally stomping up and down the stairs, and you might hear some reverberations. But apart from that, as far as having some friends over and you're in the living area and you got a bit of music playing and you're all gas bagging and having a laugh and that, you'd never hear that.
No way. And I think what I've sort of noticed is when windows are open, so maybe rear windows are open, you'll hear sound go out and around and come back, and that's just living reasonably close to neighbours. That's going to happen, and you can shut windows and shut doors, but when all the that's where you'll hear sound, not actually through the through the wall.
Definitely in my experience, it has not been an issue.
And also, Gav, probably just mentioned, this is going back to the common property and land on title, but the private open space that you're able to achieve with the side-by-side regarding front yards. You know, you get a 6 metre now, 6 metre front setback, nice front yard, and then space in the back. You know, your backyards are just, you know, if you're a 15 metre frontage, you're 7.5 metres by whatever depth you've been able to achieve.
You take 3 at least with the new res code.
Yeah, 100%.
So 20 square metres, and that's usable land as well.
Yeah, it's great. Like nice square, and if you've got your orientation reasonably right, well then you've got 2 properties with sort of reasonable orientation rather than your front to back where you can be shadowing each other or you can be, you know, even not shadowing each other, just big. You know, when you're standing in the front backyard, the backyard of the front unit, you're sort of looking at your big brother out the back that's a double story.
Yeah, also keep in mind with the res code now, particularly in bayside areas, our side setbacks are not as limited, so we can get more accommodation upstairs, and that might also lead to where we might even purposely shorten our designs a little bit, whereas bayside we'd have to extend them out a bit just to get that extra floor space upstairs to get the accommodation in there that we needed. And it was because they were narrow, it wasn't very flexible in what we could put, where we could put it. It was a little challenging. So if we can make those a bit wider now and maybe shorten the dwellings, you're going to get more backyard as well, and as much, if not more, accommodation upstairs.
Yeah, which, I love all that opening up, because being able to deliver that sort of, that amount of accommodation as far as living, boxing it up, squishing it out, and becoming more homes than, than sort of townhouses and small backyards. I think the more space we can put in the backyards, which, like you said, that's one of the biggest sort of free kicks of these new planning requirements, the front setback, being able to put more dwelling inside that sort of footprint area, it's just going to equal more backyard, which is going to hopefully drag some of our house buyers with bigger budgets over to these town home products.
I think if you're looking at those 650 to 700 square metre blocks and you're able to get more accommodation and have more backyard, then absolutely you're going to get more of those home buyers interested in those properties, and they're going to, across the board, they're going to be a better property, a better lifestyle. But then it also opens up, as we discussed, I think on the last pod we talked about, where we could actually even go for a smaller block, reduce costs, and still get a really good accommodation and still have a patch of land at the back. But, you know, maybe looking now at sites that are closer to 600 or even a little bit less, and still getting good accommodation and lifestyle on those.
They all want to know what's your choice. If you've got a standard, I'm not going to say 15, I'm going to say 16-ish, 16 to 17, so open up the gates a bit. We've got the new planning requirements. What are your main considerations when deciding, are we going side by side or going front to back?
I'd say unless the market demands it, I'd be going to a side-by-side still. That I think is, for me, simplicity, flexibility, ability to get good accommodation in, getting maximum usage out of the open space at the back or the front, particularly the back of the house. I think all of those factors, and also then put on top of that the costs. So you can either save money or you can actually use that money to get better accommodation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think with the side-by-side, it is a more of an efficient way to build.
Yeah.
And I like to think that the resales are usually better. Like you said, unless we're talking about a massive 800,000 square metre block in Brighton where we can create 2 genuine homes. But for the most part, it's a side-by-side, cost and resale. Then also, I think with these new planning requirements, for me, it's leaning into the side-by-side. When we're talking front setbacks are getting better for both. Yeah. Not just the one and then the one out the back type thing. The backyards are getting bigger with the side-by-sides. And like you said, we're filling out above. And then when it comes to site coverage and those sorts of things, I think the site coverage being a bit more flexible is going to help the side-by-sides. We'll still hit the garden open space, at some point, but with the front to backs and that big common driveway, the garden open space is always an issue. So, and it's going to remain an issue just because the concrete being captured in your percentage of your hard stand surfaces that isn't provided as garden open space. So those ones are always going to still sort of bash up against that garden open space, where the side by sides, we have got growth in them.
Yeah, I think as we've discussed, the changes are very good, and I think they impact all developments. But just in like we're having a quick chat before, I think there's no doubt that when you're comparing apples with apples in those two design strategies, the side by side benefits the most.
Yeah. Nice work, Gav. Thanks for that. And demystifying and declunking an age-old sort of question that some people sort of struggle to get their head around. I know a lot of our followers sort of know where we stand on it, but good to cover off on it today and look at the pros and cons.
It'll be interesting to see how in areas such as Monash, where you might start to see more side-by-sides coming up, and if the market's responding to that, they might actually drive prices up a bit because, they've got a different product that is, I think, more appealing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A different product, which we think sort of superior anyway, but then sprinkle in your changes and setbacks and upstairs setbacks and all, site coverage and all those sorts of things, and suddenly we're driving townhouse prices up. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Great point. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, get across to Instagram, come say hello, and jump in the Little Fish Network. Happy developing.